40 to 60% of classroom students have experienced at least one traumatic event in their lifetime.
Trauma is not remembering. Trauma is reliving.
Are we trying to elevate trauma awareness or trauma informed?
You know better than anyone else that culture is changing.
Youth ministry is complicated,
and doing it by yourself is really challenging. So
let's rethink it together. Sound like a game day.
welcome to the Rethinking Youth Ministry Podcast.
That was exactly like I imagined. Welcome back to the Rethinking Youth Ministry Podcast. My name is Ashley, and today we're going to be talking about rethinking how trauma and mental health inform how we do youth ministry. But before we jump in, I need you to meet the expert we have in the room, who I can't think of anyone else I'd want to have this conversation with.
Nobody else.
Absolutely. I can't wait. I mean, you probably already know her. To my left, if you're not looking, to my left is the one, the only Dr. Chinwe Williams. Did you like that?
I love you, period. As I continue to say.
She tolerated that. She loves you.
She's like, where are you going?
Yes. So I am a licensed mental health therapist. I practice in Roswell, but like so many people, I have a hybrid model of practice. So I work also in my home office. And gosh, probably for close to 18 years, I've been counseling individuals, young people, older people, families around transitions. So that's sort of a general way of talking about how life can be filled with ups and downs and turns and twists, and the emotions that tends to generate. So anxiety is a specialty area of mine because life transitions can breed anxiety and sometimes even stress, chronic stress, and trauma. So trauma is another specialty area of mine. So love what I do. Love that I get to have this conversation with you guys today.
Thank you so much for being here. She's also the author of a few books. Maybe you heard of the book called Seen, and then her latest, Beyond the Spiral for Teenagers. It's wonderful. Oh my goodness. We'll dive into this more.
Yeah.
And across from Chinwe, I am so excited for the youth ministry world to get to know this person.
She's giving you a shimmy already.
I like the shimmy.
I like it. Kim, tell us about yourself.
Well, hello. I'm Kim. I hold a bachelor's in social work, and I am a trauma-informed practitioner. I am also the managing editor for the middle school curriculum team here at Orange Students. Whoop, whoop. So that is what I get to do 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, and sometimes on the weekends. So that is my day to day, but my ultimate passion is trauma and just bringing awareness and light to trauma and how it affects our day to day, and not just in adults and in veterans and in broken people, but in our children and in our schools and every ounce of just society. And so really my passion is just, how do we shift the paradigm? How do we open the eyes of parents, leaders, teachers, politicians, influencers, everybody, to just change the generations coming up behind us.
So good.
So that's my passion.
Brilliant.
So good. I'm Stuart Hall, Director of Student Leadership here. I feel like I need to talk real gentle right now because the vibe is so chill. I am excited is not the word. This is a critical conversation. And I say that not only as a 30-something plus year youth leader, but more so as a parent. Kelly and I are the parents of 3 young adult children, all 3 who have experienced what Chinwe and I have talked about a lot. The loneliness, anxiety, depression issue was a pandemic long before COVID-19.
Yep.
And one of the things that I've learned as a father is that you don't fake anxiety, depression, and despair. You fake being okay. Mm-hmm. And so part of the reason why experts and you and I trying to wrestle this to the ground as youth leaders is so important is that our youth ministries, our faith communities, our homes are full of teenagers who are who many times are faking being okay. Mm-hmm. And they teeter on that despair, depression, anxiety ledge. And any way that we can help them, I think it's critical.
I love that. I feel similar to that. I share your passion, not the parent-teen piece, but just looking at the latest statistics and studies on Generation Alpha, Generation Z. I'm like, we don't have a choice as youth pastors and leaders of the next generation. We have to be trauma informed. We have to address the mental health crisis.
Can I add something to that? Not only do we not have a choice, but most of us don't have the tools. And the reason why experts sitting here are important is because I think one of the issues in the church is that we think because we have a voice, we have the tools. We don't have the tools for this issue.
Yeah.
And so we need to have professionals speak in.
I'm going to add to that.
Stack on it.
Not only do we not have the tools, but our teenagers don't know how to use them.
Yeah.
There's a difference.
Yeah, that's good.
Can we back up a moment and even address the difference between, because I see this and you might see this too, the difference between being trauma aware and being trauma informed, because there is a difference.
There is a difference.
There is a difference, and you can add to this.
Sure.
But being trauma aware, I think we are all trauma aware, right? We are all aware that trauma exists in the world. Being trauma aware is the knowledge that trauma influences the way that people react, and being trauma informed is lending your experience and your knowledge to influence policies and procedures, and taking the knowledge to then give leaders and students and teachers the tools to then make changes.
That's so
and
good.
so I think that's what we have to define, maybe, is are we trying to elevate trauma awareness or trauma informed?
Yeah.
So maybe that's something to unravel too.
Yeah. No, I think that's an important point. When I think about trauma informed care or trauma informed practices, I immediately want to sort of jump in and tell ministry leaders, university professors, hospital staff, you don't have to be a licensed therapist to do this, because being trauma informed is really a process by which you deliver any service. So any industry can be trauma informed without having to treat trauma, if that makes sense. And I do think that it's really important, Kim, that we talk about this out the gate, because for all of you youth pastors and small group leaders that are watching this, you don't have to be a therapist to understand trauma, to be aware of the prevalence rates, to know that it's okay to teach certain skills that you already have, but maybe you don't realize is going to be helpful in this regard, without feeling like you are stepping outside of your role as a ministry leader.
I love that.
Yeah, because hospital staff get trained on this as well.
Absolutely. So as mental health professionals, I'm curious, why do you feel this conversation is so important specifically for youth leaders?
Yeah. Well, Kim, you touched on it. The prevalence rate is so high. So right now, the last stat that I saw indicated that 70% of adults in the U.S. will experience or have experienced a traumatic incident. I think that's way underreported, by the way.
Wait, say that again?
So the last stat that I've seen indicates that an estimate, 70% of U.S. adults have experienced or will experience a trauma.
Wow.
I think 90+% have experienced a traumatic incident. And we can just go as far back as the pandemic.
Right.
Where I think probably each and every one of us, every one of us sitting on this, on this set can speak to that.
Yeah.
And then the other stat that I've seen among students is an estimate of 40 to 60% of classroom students have experienced at least one traumatic event in their lifetime. So why wouldn't we be having these conversations?
Wow.
Yeah. When you look around and you can say, oh, okay, it's not just one person. it's probably several and close to half.
You know, Kim, before I jump over to you, I've been reading this new book, Unbroken, in preparation of this conversation. It's phenomenal. I cannot recommend a book more than that one at the moment.
Other than Beyond the Spiral, but
well, that's absolutely Beyond the Spiral for teenagers right now. Unbroken,
Shameless
which
plug.
what I love is it's new, and so she references the pandemic in it, and so does Beyond the Spiral. That's not what I meant.
It sounds
Hold on.
amazing.
But
And if you haven't communicating with middle schoolers.
yeah, do that. Okay,
Yeah.
sorry. I'm getting to my point. One of the things, and the reason I want to, is that I feel like I have a lot to learn in this area. And so one of the things that stuck out to me so much, you know, just responding to the statistics you just shared, is trauma isn't about the actual event. It's about how someone experiences the event.
That's correct.
And we have no idea what events we walk through in life, or a kid walks through, that will be a traumatic event or thing for them.
Yeah.
In the future. And so to me, I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Like that is, and then the other thing I learned in it was just that trauma is not remembering. Trauma is reliving.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that changes the way you approach a teenager on the conversation. So I know we'll jump into this
Can
more.
I
but I'm
add to
just-
that as a question? Is that part of what makes trauma so difficult for novices, especially? Is it so subjective that an older generation can see what's happening with Gen Z and Gen Alpha and go, well, that's not really traumatic.
Yes.
But it's traumatic to that child. Is that part of why there's tension?
Yeah.
It's a good question.
Yes. So trauma is not one thing, it's many things. Trauma, the way that trauma sort of presents itself is going to be extremely unique based on one's unique nervous system. So for example, I give this example a lot. In my neighborhood, my neighbor experiences a house fire, and then I experience a house fire. And my neighbor says, you know what? I lost everything, but everybody's okay. So God is good. We're going to keep forging ahead. And I can't get out of bed for about a week. I haven't lost anyone. I lost material things. But let's say based on my unique nervous system, the way that God created and designed my central nervous system, along with any other trauma history I've had, that experience is not going to be disappointing or something that I can easily reframe. It's something that's going to be devastating to me. So that's just one example of how trauma just doesn't look like one thing. And Stu, to your point, I think for many years, first of all, PTSD wasn't a diagnosis until 1970 because of the Vietnam War, right? So to your point, older generations may, and even current generation, right? Or you know, any generation may think of trauma as being something that's catastrophic, like combat war, or catastrophic like sexual abuse. Those things are horrendous. But what we don't realize, I've worked in the school system for a long time, a move can be traumatic to a 6-year-old. Bullying is absolutely traumatic for a lot of middle and high schoolers. You guys have heard those stories. Getting going through separation or divorce or anything that, you know, you feel a sense of separation within your family or abandonment can be experienced as a trauma. And for some people who don't fully understand the breadth and scope of trauma may think, okay, so your dad's in the military and you moved a few times, big deal, but not realizing
or I was fine and I had the same thing happen and I was fine.
100%, but we're all so unique. Would you agree with that, Kim?
Absolutely. It goes to just the terms and the definitions and challenging, you know, the DSM-5 and getting familiar and becoming familiar with, you know, complex trauma and the trauma that a child receives at the hands of their caregiver over a prolonged period of time. And so it's nuanced, right? And it's not the same trauma that your mama may have grown up with. And it's not the same. So to your point, it's, yes, a generation behind us can look at us and think,
yeah, they use the term snowflake a lot.
Yes, but also the generation that we're in, or the generations that are coming along, you know, they did not grow up with the same things that they're facing today, with just the different violences that our generations are facing. So yes, our nervous systems are wired differently. And so they're experiencing different things, and it's more complicated than I think people are realizing.
Yeah, it's not one event. It's the way you experience that particular event.
Yeah, that's so good. Kim, I want to hear a little bit about why this conversation is important from your perspective.
Yeah. It's a little bit complex for me. So, and I think, Chinwe, without you realizing that you're a part of this story, back from the DMs that I sent to you on even Instagram, you're very much a part of this story.
This is actually an intervention.
An intervention. Yes. So I don't think I fully understood trauma even myself, and I probably will get emotional for the listeners out there. So about 5 years ago, I have 4 beautiful children. The 3 oldest are biological, and our youngest is adopted. And he is this magnificent little creature. And we adopted him when he was 7 years old. But he came to us with just 7 years of just trauma, just abuse and neglect at the hands of his caregivers. And it was awful to watch. So, me being me and me having the personality that I have, I refuse to just sit by and watch him deteriorate because of the abuse that he had endured. So I took it upon myself to learn everything I could about trauma and how it was affecting his little brain. And I decided that I was going to help rewire his brain. I was going to be that safe place that he could have his tantrums, that he could regulate, that he could punch holes in the walls, and he would know that he had a safe place to come back to, and that we would process it, and that there was always God's grace on the other side, because I believe in faith and I believe in science. I believe in both of those things. They're both equally real to me. So it's personal. And on the other side of that, he is Black. And unfortunately, he has had to endure all that comes with being Black in America. And that is when I reached out to you, Dr. Chinwe Williams. And I said, I need help. I don't know how to raise this young Black man in America. And you were gracious enough to offer me resources, because that is another trauma. And then I had this young man who was moving from middle school or from elementary school into middle school. And the church that we were going to went from having completely structured small group environments in elementary school to this loud middle school environment, and he could not handle it. He was put into a small group with these neurotypical kids. He looks typical on the outside. He's not typical. He's anything but typical. His brain is not wired typical. He's got all this trauma. So he goes into this large room with the flashing lights. These leaders, nothing against them, that are just not equipped. Not equipped. He goes into his dinosaur survival mode. That's the only survival mode he knows. He's in the corner acting like a T-Rex, because T-Rex is the biggest and the baddest. He's in survival mode. So he can't cooperate in this large youth environment. I get 15 minutes with the youth leaders. they don't understand what trauma is. He can't go back because he doesn't feel safe. The kids in his small group are bullying him. They see him at school, they're bullying him. And he says to me, he says, I can't go back to a church and learn about a God with kids who tell me that God made a mistake. So that's why this is important to me. Because I think if we gave leaders and church staff the tools to just identify when they see a kid who looks typical, who looks quote unquote normal, if we give them the tools to say, okay, there's a kid curled up in the corner like a T-Rex, let's lean in. And maybe they're not looking for, they're not attention seeking, they're connection seeking.
100%.
Right?
100%.
So I don't mean to derail us for a whole 10 minutes here, but
this is why we're here.
You ask why this is.
That illustration speaks directly to why this conversation matters.
This is personal.
Thank you for sharing all
wow.
that.
Wow.
And I'm sitting here thinking any leader, pastor, parent listening doesn't want any kid they care about to ever feel that way.
No.
Yeah.
Or parent to feel that way. So here's our challenge, leaders, is to let's figure this out. Let's be better.
Yeah.
Let's make sure our youth space is informed and equipped to handle a situation like that. And maybe that's where the conversation starts for your team, is if that were to happen in your ministry, do people know what to do?
Right.
Yeah.
And if the answer is no, which if I'm being really honest, I think I don't think I would even know exactly how I would handle that, which sucks to say, but I want to be ready to handle that.
There's also this interesting juxtaposition with what Kim is sharing, who I don't think her son is an anomaly. There are a lot of young women and men like him. The other side of it is a lot of parents see the church as another step in the high achievement of what it means to be an American teenager. And all the data shows that students who are attending high achieving schools are 3 to 7 times more likely to be clinically depressed, have anxiety, be lonely, and have despair. So even kids that you may see as neurotypical are experiencing some trauma too. And we're depending on, as you said so eloquently, ill-equipped leaders to know how to navigate that. It causes the whole thing to be much more serious than just let's, pass lifesavers with a toothpick.
Yeah.
It's much more important than that.
So important. When I was a school counselor at the University of Georgia, I was part of this initiative called Transforming School Counseling. And I remember we were part of this article that came out, and the title said, "Not just certified nice people." And it really opened up people's eyes. And I was like, yes, because it spoke to the fact that school counselors were sometimes given this, this reputation of, do the schedule, almost like the nurse, right? If you have a boo-boo, emotionally speaking, go and get the Band-Aid. But school counseling is a profession, and there are skills that are associated with it. So in my thinking and rethinking about this topic of how to create trauma-informed ministries, I started thinking about, gosh, pastors have so many innate skills. You're pastoral, you're kind, you're empathetic, you're brilliant, and our kids need more. We need more than prayers and well wishes, more than eloquent sermons, more than the fun, all the amazing things that you guys do, right? We need that. And we have to have folks that are trained in what we're talking about. And Kim, I just want to say very quickly, I am so glad that your son had the opportunity to have that container of care and empathy and intentionality. When you said, I don't care what it takes, I'm going to rewire his brain. And then how sad is it to know that, that protective bubble isn't forever, it's temporary, right? But we have this tremendous opportunity as ministry leaders to really dig into what it means to develop those skills and to recognize that some of us have it and some of us have to really kind of hone in on it. And the ability to see that trauma is not just one thing again, and sometimes looks like really bad behavior. And I'll just be very transparent. Don't want to go down this road, by the way, but I have a Black child who is on the autism spectrum. And there was a time when we stopped going to church, and we go to a very large, very well-resourced church. Now we're back and the leaders are amazing, but they didn't know what to do because we were going through a season that was really, really rough. And those behaviors also look like behaviors of a child who had gone through a lot of trauma. So what can we do to equip leaders to be able to recognize the behaviors that are really signs of dysregulation, and then what to do about it?
Can you unpack, you just said dysregulation.
Yeah.
That might be a new phrase for a lot of people listening.
Yes.
Can you unpack that for us a little?
Yeah, I think Kim did a brilliant job of sharing that trauma rewires your brain and impacts your central nervous system. So your brain, the nerves, your spinal cord, it changes the way that you think sometimes. It heightens a lot of emotions. So it makes your emotions very intense. You're not just sad, you are in despair. You're not just scared, you're hypervigilant. You're jumping. If a fly hits the window, that's what happens with my kid, because he's experienced some trauma as a result of his diagnosis. Yeah. Everything feels bigger inside your body. And so that is dysregulation. When we're regulated, we're more able to bring calm to our mind and our body. We all can be dysregulated, by the way. It doesn't mean that you've experienced a trauma. I think most of us have. But for those of us who have had minimal trauma, or I hate to compare it, but trauma that hasn't completely sort of terrorized you, you have a greater ability to regulate your emotions. And so I think that's something that a lot of ministry leaders will probably see out the gate. And then there's some people who are imploders. You're not going to see it at all, but they're still going through a lot of emotional dysregulation internally.
Oh. Kim, I've heard you talk about dysregulation a lot on our team, and just introducing that to us. Do you want to add anything to what Chinwe just shared?
I mean, I think that's great. You did a great job just explaining it. I think being mindful of when you're dysregulated, because it can happen and does happen to everybody. Yes. And I think it happens more often than people are aware. So just being in tune with your own body and just knowing when it happens and knowing how to bring yourself back down. Just being aware of when it happens.
And that's for you personally, but on the outside looking at a kid, dysregulation can look like, gosh, they're really tired. They're not focused. They look like they didn't have enough sleep. They're acting out. They have really poor boundaries. So that's what it looks like from the outside looking at a kid.
Or even with adults, just they're not acting within their normal, predictable behaviors.
Yes.
Like someone operates within those normal boundaries. And if you notice that they're not operating within those, they may be dysregulated. So if somebody's acting out of character,
correct,
that could be a sign of they're dysregulated.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So not just explosive, but even withdrawn behavior. Good point.
That's really good. Thank you for unpacking that. So I'm curious, as mental health professionals and parents, what is something you wish people understood when they were interacting with middle and high schoolers? Who maybe are navigating mental health or trauma?
Yeah. I just very quickly, two things, because I immediately heard when you were asking that question, how can they help me? to stay regulated as a parent. And I am not kidding. My son just turned 12. So you've got hormones and autism. Hello. So very quickly, I would say recognize that parents need to be well. And that goes for teachers, that goes for staff, that goes for ministry leaders, small group leaders. The way that you communicate what you are seeing has got to be filled with grace. Even if 5 seconds later you are frustrated as all get out. Because we are, I'll speak for myself, I'm in church praying, not listening to the sermon in all cases, but praying that my child will make it through. It just depends on the season, right? And so I think if leaders understood that parents are going through it too, that would be so helpful because we are a huge part of their ecosystem. So we have to be well, we have to be regulated. And I think church leaders especially are like perfectly equipped to do that. But sometimes in their frustration, not fully understanding how these things manifest and present, it just seems like poor behavior. Yeah. And it's much more than that. So that's on the parent side.
Okay. That's great. You said two things.
Yeah. I think there's a whole lot that we can talk about in terms of how they can help students, but I'm so curious to hear if you guys have.
By the way, that was really helpful.
Okay. Thank you.
I think that every mom and dad desperately prays for another significant adult to echo and echo what hopefully they're investing in their child, but also invest in their kid. And our children, if we're not careful, every parent gets to a point where you're always the primary spiritual influence, but you're not necessarily the primary voice they want to hear.
Ooh, that's
good.
And an adult volunteer or a youth leader coming alongside and loving your child, investing in your child, seeing your kid for who they are, pouring into them is a lifeline.
Yes. And
so I feel what Chinwe is feeling. And I also feel it because, gosh, this is timely. Our youngest daughter and I were driving downtown last night, and she was just on a podcast about dealing with depression as a Division I athlete. Because heads up, it happens even for the kid that you don't think it's going on with.
Yeah.
And she talked about how her senior year, she was empty because there wasn't anybody investing in her. And she was leading a small group at a church. She was surrounded by coaches. Her mom and dad are, I don't think we missed a game her senior year, but she still felt empty. And again, she was faking being okay. And she said it was the darkest year of her life. So I just think about, and this is no shade at all to the faith community she was a part of. But when we see kids that seem like they've got it all together, we think they don't need investing in.
Right.
And it could be the exact opposite. Yeah. That's the kid who's pretending to be okay. That's what I think about when I hear that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kim, what about you? What's something that you wish people knew that worked with teenagers?
That it's so much easier if leaders and parents just collaborate and work together. Like, I know we preach partner with parents and we say that, but I have found the most success in all the relationships with my kids when the small group leader, the teacher, whoever it may be, that was on the other side of my child, when we just came together and we worked together, whether it's the nuances of my T-Rex child in the corner, you know what I mean? Like, we work so much better when we're just together.
Yeah.
And so if you can build that trust, it's not going to happen overnight, but if you're intentional about building that relationship with the other adult in your child's life, it does wonders.
Yeah.
And I would imagine, like, if leaders are doing the hard work of trying to learn about mental health and learn about trauma, the way that they interact with a parent, I would imagine a parent's like, oh, thank God they know what this is.
Yes.
Like, I'm sure it's gotta be a relief to be like, thank God you're acknowledging what we're walking through. And like, okay, I want to partner with you more too, because you're trying to partner with me.
Yes. And even if you don't know, ask questions.
Yeah.
Because that, I think, speaks volumes to the desire to want to partner and help.
I mean,
and I think part of the reason we threw our hands up, and I'm not one to easily give up, but we had to eventually walk away from our small group situation. And I think when we finally decided to do that, it was because I did not feel as though the people on the other end were interested in the resources that I was trying to provide.
Got it.
I was trying.
Yeah.
So to your point, I was desperately wanting for somebody to come back and say, I'm learning with you.
Yeah.
I'm hearing you.
I can totally understand that.
Can I speak to that? Or
Yeah.
I would love to throw this out there and you guys respond. I think part of the issue there is there's an elephant in the room with this topic as it relates to faith communities and youth ministries. And that is, there are so many of us who think that if you'll just trust God, you'll just trust what the scriptures say, then I don't have to lean into that. I can tell I've hit a nerve. And that's why I want to bring it up, because we'll have people take, what Paul wrote to Philippians, do not be anxious about anything. And so then they frame anxiety as a sin issue instead of a mental health issue. I would love you guys to talk about that, because I've even been in environments as a communicator where I've been confronted with the idea of trying to deal with teenagers from a reality perspective and being scolded for not just going, well, let them trust Jesus and they need to read the Bible more. Wow. Talk about it.
I can say, and I really would love to hear your take. I just know, speaking as a believer, as somebody who has educated themselves in this area, somebody as a mom, I feel like when we only lean into the scripture, we are just doing ourselves a disservice by not believing people. When we try to silence people and how they're feeling, and when we try to tell them to lean into scripture as the only solution, I feel like there is some type of, I don't know that I have the words, but you are invalidating their feelings. You are invalidating their design,
their experience. You are putting your thumb over them as a human. You are erasing part of them. Yeah.
And it's more than that to me.
Yeah.
Like,
one of the biggest, I agree 100%. One of the biggest tenets or principles around trauma care or trauma-informed principles is safety. And so when I think of safety, I think of physical safety, which every single small group leader, ministry leader, pastor would say, absolutely, that is our 100%, that is our priority. But then there's psychological safety. And going back to, which, by the way, Google, there's so many different studies that are out there. Google did a workplace study around psychological safety. It is a big deal. And there's so many positive benefits to that. But psychological safety means helping every single person, and we're going to be talking about students here, not adults, but student, feel seen, feel heard, feel acknowledged, and feel accepted. And we do that in a number of ways. We accept where they are in terms of their gender, their race, where they come from, and what they say they are experiencing. So I agree with you, Kim, that when we lean only on scripture, I do believe that scripture is foundational. I do believe that Jesus is a healer. I do believe all of those things. And I believe that God created physicians. The great physician created physicians. I'm a mental health therapist. Okay. And, what I have to say isn't new. I don't believe that there's anything new under the sun. So why can't we embrace both? And then if we're going to talk about generational differences, that is the quickest way to lose Gen Z and Gen Alpha when you tell them that their experiences around mental health does not matter. I attended some summit that 450 students in one of the most diverse school districts here in Georgia put together a student summit called Student Voice, and they asked the students who were represented in the summit, what are the topics do you want to have discussed at this particular summit? Guess what the only two topics were? Mental health. These are high schoolers and middle schoolers. Mental health is number one. Number two is diversity.
Yeah, I was going to say right.
Right? Is anybody here surprised about that?
No.
That's what the stats say.
So when we say this is a sin issue and not a mental health issue, what are we really saying to kids that are saying, hey, adults, hey, superintendent, hey, teachers, hey, staff, this is what I'm experiencing and this is what I want to talk about because I want to get better. They're hoping and they're coping, but we need to walk alongside with them. So that's my response to that.
Thank you.
That's so good. What hangs in the balance of us getting this right?
It's a scary thought for me because it's just so real. I want to share something in response to that. We're all familiar with ACE, Adverse Childhood Experiences, and that research, I'm certain. So this is what hangs in the balance. For kids who've experienced trauma, they're 15 times more likely to attempt suicide. For kids and teens who've experienced trauma, they're 4 times more likely to become an addict. For kids who've experienced trauma, for males specifically who've experienced trauma, they have a 4,600% increase in the likelihood of using intravenous drugs. And that is not it. I could go on and on and on. So that for me, this is kind of the world I live in. Yeah. That's what hangs in the balance of us understanding this and trying to make an impact.
Is there anything we can do as youth leaders to help prevent a kid from experiencing trauma? Or like, I was thinking like, if it's about how someone experiences an event, it's not about the specific event. It's not like your event was worse, so you must have more trauma than somebody else's event. So like, I've definitely learned that.
Yeah.
But if it's about how you experience an event, would you say what would you say the importance is of, you said a safe place, but of processing that event?
Yeah.
Or keeping it inside? Like, what role does that play? Because I feel like volunteers and youth leaders have a chance to have those conversations sometimes.
Not just have the conversations, impact the healing. Impact the healing. And that's what these books that I know we'll share in the show notes will show you. So I feel like I've been talking a lot, so I want to say this very quickly.
Shout out show notes.
The number one predictor for success for any child is the presence of at least one caring adult. Stu and I talk about this all the time. And what buffers the effects of trauma? We can't prevent trauma. Could we have prevented the pandemic? We can't prevent trauma, but what we can do is to buffer the effects of it, to minimize the effects of it. And the number one thing is to believe kids when they say I'm experiencing anxiety, despair, depression. I'm self-harming because I feel alone. This is a cry for attention. Maybe, but let's give them some attention.
Yeah, they might need that attention.
Right?
Yeah.
Say that again.
And the church is well equipped to do that. So support from caring adults is the thing that minimizes the effects. So my neighbor that had the house fire had a lot of people rally around her. The neighborhood, the community, the church, people from Michigan, nobody actually had a house fire, but I'm speaking as an illustration.
Metaphorically.
So metaphorically, thank you. It is support. So that is what helps. And we have to acknowledge it, first of all.
That is so huge and so doable for leaders of teenagers. That is so doable. Yeah. And it's such a motivation for anyone who's investing their life in this to keep going. Yeah, like you may not ever see the effects of your support or maybe the impact of your support right away. Yeah. But I mean, I know I get messages from students that I taught 20 years ago and they say something like, I don't even remember that.
Wow.
You know? And so.
But it stuck with them.
Yeah. And I mean, we never know. Kim, what hangs in the balance of us getting this right?
I don't know how to top that. You said everything. That's like the mic drop. That's it. The stats, the emotions, the relationships, the future, the next generation, the direction of where we want our children to go.
It's good.
I mean, you said it all.
Well, the showing up.
Yeah.
Showing up consistently and looking at an environment as the adult and saying, I'm not sure that this is the best environment for his mental health. That's what you did as a parent. And as ministry leaders, there's so many different versions of that. You guys can speak to that.
Stuart, I want to hear what you think. What hangs in the balance of us getting this right?
What's running through my mind when you ask that question are just actual stories. I think about our youngest, before she left school, she's walking her dog and she notices that law enforcement and EMT people are trying to get into her building and she offers to help them get in and discovers 15 minutes later that a football player who lives on the floor below her had taken his life. And the reasons that seem to be emerging are things that just like I don't know if you've ever felt like they paralyze me, because he is one of so many that feel the same sort of anxiety, feel the same sort of despair. I think lives hang in the balance. Like, we just want our kids to come home. They're not pawns. And too often, I think we as ministry leaders, it's almost like we're playing this sadistic game of Monopoly. And children are just the pawns. And that's Kim's son is a person. And he's just not one additional cog in the wheel. And it causes me as a leader to go, who is my silence protecting? Am I just protecting myself? As a youth leader, I think we all need to ask ourselves this question. Like, are we being quiet about this issue because we know what it's going to bring to the top? Or who's your silence protecting?
Wow.
Because I think we have a responsibility to speak to it. Not because anybody, yes, there are books and resources, but because there are lives at stake. And we haven't even talked about if it's a sexual fluidity issue.
I was just thinking that.
Like the number goes up 300% if you're talking about suicide.
Yes.
As it relates to some sort of sexual fluidity issue. So for me, maybe it's because I kissed death on the mouth in 2020. Maybe it's because I'm an old white dude. I can't let my silence protect me. It's about kids.
I can't help but think, as I'm sitting here listening to all of you, just anyone who's in ministry, I'm going to guess you're motivated because you want to give hope to people.
Yeah.
And if you want to be the light of the world and you want to be the hope you want to have the good news to give to a 12-year-old, then what hangs in the balance is we become a source of trauma rather than
helping to heal.
The healing.
We pile on.
Yeah. If we silence Gen Alpha and Gen Z in the discussion, and I'm even going to ask the question, what 12-year-old even really understands trauma? So it's not like you can have this kind of a conversation always with a 12-year-old, but I just if that's what they're saying they want to talk about in a room of 450 people, I'm like, well, when Jesus showed up on the scene, Jesus made everything relevant. Mm-hmm. And if that's what the studies are saying, and that's what's coming out of their mouth, and that's what parents are saying, if we really, really, truly mean that we have the best news on the planet and we're here to bring hope to a generation, then we better talk about the things that matter.
Ooh.
Well, I know that I'm not the only one who's feeling challenged here. And I would love to invite you all on this journey of learning more about mental health and becoming more trauma informed. I know there are a lot of things we didn't even get a chance to unpack. This will not be our last conversation, but if there's something you're wrestling with or you're kind of working through, please reach out, DM us at Orange Students. We would love to hear about it so we can keep this conversation going.